All right, hello, ladies and gentlemen. And in today's video, we're going to be talking about bone density for hikers, which is a really important subject for a lot of the hiking population out there. And we're going to be talking about how training and physical preparation comes into this equation and how you can apply it to help your bone density. So to start with, let's just quickly cover why I'm actually talking about this, because it may seem a little bit left of center for what I usually talk about, specifically training for hiking, but it is very, very relevant. In the sense, when it comes down to it, bone density is a concern for many, many people out there. A lot of people have been told by their doctors that bone density is something they need to look out for, something they need to work on, or whatever it may be. When it comes down to the topic of bone density, there are a lot of different risk factors which can affect your risk of bone density loss. Some of them are controllable, some of them not so controllable. Now, in amongst all those different risk factors, there are three significant risk factors which I want to bring up here, which are really relevant for the people who tend to watch my videos or follow my content. Number one, sex is a significant risk factor in the sense of many women are at a higher risk of getting bone density issues. Age, as we age, bone density loss does tend to accelerate. So as we get older and older, this risk factor does get a little bit higher. And also changes in hormones. There's a few different situations in life. If we have a big change in hormones, this can affect our bone density, and menopause is one of these. Now, when it comes down to the hikers that I work with, a big percentage of the hikers that I work with, both directly and people who follow my content, fall into three of these categories or two or three of these categories. And over time, many people have raised questions and concerns around bone density and how it applies to their hiking, to their training. And I thought it was definitely worthwhile just exploring this in a bit of detail. So if people are wondering this in the hiking context, how it can apply to them, so you can have a bit more information on the subject. Now, with any type of medical thing, first point of call should always be your doctor. If you are wondering about bone density, if you're wondering how to apply what I'm about to talk about today, if you're wondering what you need to be doing outside of training and physical preparation, go chat with your doctor, because today we're talking about training. And that is one factor which can be beneficial when it comes down to this, but it's not the only factor. There's medications, there's nutrition, there's other lifestyle factors. So if you haven't chatted with your doctor about this, first point of call, let's go do that, please. But beyond that, one recommendation a lot of people get when they are bringing up the topic of bone density or they have been diagnosed with something, they often get the recommendation that certain types of physical activity and training can be beneficial. And this tends to be where a lot of the questions come up, because quite often, not all the time, but quite often, the recommendations around training are a little bit vague. You might get a sentence or two or your little A4 document or something like that, but that does lead to a little bit of confusion. And I regularly hear things from my hikers over the months and over the years, things like, I've heard lots of hiking is good for bone density, or asking the question, is pack walking or rucking good for bone density? Or one I got the other day was, I heard jumping is good for bone density, but isn't that dangerous? Should I be doing this? What do you think? Or I've been told I need to stop doing X, Y, and Z because of my bone density or whatever it may be. So the intention for today is to get into this topic in a little bit of detail, keeping in the context of you as a hiker, so you can have a good understanding kind of how this all comes together, and just have a little bit more information on the subject. Now, to be clear, I'm not pretending to be a physiologist or a physio or anything like that. This is all general information, but if you do want to get a bit deeper, go see a doctor, see a physiologist, see a physio, whatever it may be. Now, what we are going to be covering today is just basically why considering bone density is so important for the hiking community, and also exploring different areas of training and how that can affect the bone density equation. What we're not going to be covering is we're not going to be getting into specific exercise prescriptions or workouts, because realistically, everyone is an individual. And when we're talking about something like bone density, you want to be treated like an individual in this. So we're not getting the specifics around that. And we're not going to be talking about nutrition, medication, or other lifestyle interventions. All of those are just as important, if not more important than training, depending on the situation. But that's not what we're talking about today. So again, if you want to learn more, chat with your doctor. So let's cover the importance of bone density for hikers. Why is this so important, and why it is something you as a hiker should take seriously? For anyone out there, even outside the hiking context with bone density concerns, it is a really major thing to consider for long-term quality of life. Because realistically, if we have bone density issues further on in life, we have these risks of falling over and breaking things and having mobility concerns and restricting activities and all of this. And there's so many different factors which can affect just our quality of life over time. Now, in the hiking context, there are a few extra considerations which make this even more important. Hiking, as we know, is often uneven, unstable, and undulating terrain. The risk of tripping, the risk of falling, the risk of having an accident is so much higher out on the hiking trail compared to day-to-day life. And if we have bone density issues, and if we are tripping and falling, that can put us at risk of having major issues, broken things, fractures, whatever it may be. Hiking by nature is going to be a little bit higher risk for that. Hiking is a physical challenge. We all know that. We will often push to the point of fatigue. Some people will get themselves in a situation where they're absolutely exhausted towards the end of the day. Some people will just pick up a bit of fatigue, have heavy legs, get tired, whatever it may be. Totally normal. Now, fatigue in any shape or form will increase the risk of falls. We won't be paying attention. We won't be able to sort of see where we're going quite as well. We won't be able to react where we're going. We won't lift our legs quite as much. And we have a higher risk of falls purely for fatigue. Hiking, for the most part, is difficult to access. Even the most local hike, if you're out on the trail and you've gone half an hour into the bush, that can be difficult to access. So if you do have a trip or a fall and break something, it can be tricky. Whether you have to get someone to come in on the trail and help you, whether you're in somewhere crazy, more remote where you need a helicopter rescue or something more major, being remote, having an accident, something we don't really want. So all of these definitely do make bone density concerns a top priority for hikers and definitely something you should pay attention to if it is something, on your radar. Now, on top of this, to take this a little bit further, hiking, for most of us, in all honesty, is an occupation that we kind of want to continue for as long as possible. There may be certain things in our life, certain sports, certain activities where we're like, maybe we do have a bit of a time limit on that. Maybe we can do this for the next 10, 20, 30 years, but I can't really see that doing that for almost the entirety of my life for one reason or another. Hiking isn't really one of these things. Most of us consider doing this for years and years and years and years and years for as long as possible. It's something we do to get out in nature. It's something we do to just get in that forest bathing for mental health, to feel good, to de-stress. Something we do just as a nice physical activity. It is so valuable for a lot of us. Many of us, and a lot of the people that I speak to and work with, actually see hiking as something a little bit more accessible over the years when maybe running or team sports may no longer be practical. And there's a lot of hikers that I speak with at a certain point in their life where they're like, I want to get active again. I want to get moving again. I can't actually do these things that I used to do. And I've actually discovered hiking and I love it. And it's so important for me and it's amazing. And I want to keep on doing this. And it's kind of seen as something a bit more accessible. And if you follow this chain of thought, if hiking is such an important thing for mental health, for physical health, and just generally just having a good time, and then if you get to a point where maybe like bone density becomes such an issue that you're told you shouldn't be doing it anymore because it is just too risky, years and years and years before you expected this, well, obviously this can be a bit of a bummer. It's not a great thing. And, there's a lot of negative consequences of that. And we don't want to get to that point. Now, when we come down to training for bone density and what we're exploring today, the general recommendations people often get around this is people often said, if you're looking at bone density, you want to do weight bearing and muscle strengthening exercises for bone density. This kind of gets lumped in together in almost like the same sentence. And it does lead to a little bit of confusion around what this means and kind of how it actually comes together for training practically. Some people are like, okay, cool, I'll just go out and walk, or I'll just go out and hike, or maybe I'll just do this, so this, so this. And there is a little bit of confusion around it all. So what we're going to be doing is just breaking this down a little bit and exploring and explaining what this all means and how you can actually apply this type of stuff practically into your life. So as a really, really, really basic overview around what training does for bone density, and this is the absolute most basic overview, so it's not too technical, but it will make sense. Over time, due to a number of reasons, our bone density will decrease. That's a natural consequence of us getting older, natural consequence of whatever it may be. Obviously, higher risk factors will increase that decrease, and we don't want that to keep on going. To slow and or potentially prevent this decrease in bone density, what we want to do is apply stress to the bones. And essentially, we want to apply force and stress to the bones. What will happen here is that will trigger certain things in the body, which will either slow and potentially prevent that decrease. That's what we're trying to do with training. The nuance here, and what a lot of people tend to miss or get confused, is that not all stress on the bones is created equal. We want to stress the bones, we want to apply stimulus, we want to apply some type of force to those bones to prevent things, but not all stress when it comes to training is created equal. Because ultimately, if we don't have enough stress, we won't really have an impact. There's some things that give a little bit of stress to the bones, but it's not really enough, and that won't really have an impact. Similar to if you're trying to strengthen up your muscles, we can do certain movements and it may be good, but if there's not enough force or not enough resistance or not enough challenge, we won't really see any change. If the level of stress on top of that, if we apply stress to the bones, ultimately the level of stress we apply will vary the level of positive impact. If we apply a small amount of stress, it's enough stress to see a change, but maybe we'll only have a small impact. If we apply a lot of stress, that will probably have a larger impact on bone density. The dose is the poison, or whatever that saying is. What you apply will affect what the level of impact it is, which is important to understand, and we'll get into in a moment. And to take this step further, if we apply too much stress, this can lead to problems. We can sort of say, hey, applying more and more stress is good to a point, but if we kind of go over the threshold and do too much stress for the bones and the body to handle, well, this can lead to problems. So again, it's nuance. We need to be aware of this. A good way to kind of figure this out and kind of wrap your head around this is consider training and physical activities on a spectrum. And I'm going to show you a little bit of an image that I put together. It's very rough. I'm not much of a graphic artist, but hopefully it illustrates my point. So essentially what we got here is a little bit of a spectrum, basically. What we've got is a number of different common activities that are either recommended for bone density or are common activities that hikers will naturally fall into. Now, with this little graph here, we've got the least amount of stress on the bones on the far side, and we've got the most amount of stress on the other side. And essentially, it's a spectrum which gets a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. So starting from the left, on the least amount of stress, swimming. Swimming is an activity a lot of hikers very much love. A lot of people regularly do. It's a fantastic physical activity. But in the context of bone density, it doesn't apply any stress to the bones because swimming is considered a non-weight bearing activity, meaning we are being held up by the water. There's no gravity pushing down to the bones into the floor, and it's not really going to have any impact on bone density. It's a great method of exercise for a number of other reasons, but in the context of bone density, it does not apply enough stress to see any change. Now, if we take that a step up, we apply a little bit of stress, then we get into walking. So walking is commonly recommended for people with bone density. When we're walking, we are doing a weight-bearing activity. We are on the ground, gravity is pushing down on us into our bones, into our feet, and is pushing us down into the floor. This is considered a weight-bearing activity. This is considered something beneficial for bone density, and it's definitely recommended to most people. However, in the broader context of things, walking is relatively low stress. It will be beneficial, but it's relatively low stress. So as we said before, low stress means lower amounts of impact. Not to say it isn't beneficial, but lower amounts of impact. Now, to take this next step up, one thing a lot of hikers will naturally fall into is pack walking or even just hiking with a pack. When we've got a pack on our back, we are weight bearing again. We've got weight on our back, so we've got more resistance, more pressures going through the bones, so therefore it is applying a little bit more stress. And obviously there's a range between carrying a very light pack to a very heavy pack, and that will have different stress. So that's the next level of things. Take it a step further, then we get to strength training, and this is typically recommended to most people with bone density issues. Strength training, we are applying force through the muscles, through the bones, in a variety of different ways. This is much more stressful on the bones than walking or pack walking, and it will have likely more of an impact. And then we take that a step further, the furthest progression of this, which a lot of people, which can be beneficial for bone density, but needs to be applied very, very, very intentionally and very, very, very smartly, for lack of a better word, is jump training or plyometric. So literally jumping up and down. That's applying a lot of stress to the bones, and it can have quite a bit of impact. To take this a step further, at the most amount of stress is kind of when we have an accident. If we apply too much stress to the bones too suddenly, the bones can't handle it, and that's too much stress, and that can lead to us trouble. So this is when we literally fall over and we put our hand out to catch ourselves and we break our wrist. We don't want that. So as you can see, when it comes down to physical training, it's a spectrum. There's a lot of things which will affect the bones, but degrees of effect when we come through. And I'm going to break down each of these things just so you can have a broader context, what they're good for and what they're maybe not as amazing for. But hopefully this makes sense so far. Now, as a summary, before we go any further, there are many different types of training which can affect bone density. The more stress that we can apply safely and more stress we can safely apply and handle, the more effect it can have on the bones. A few notes on this. The spectrum will be subjective. This is a very, very broad spectrum. This isn't talking to you as an individual because everyone is going to be a little bit different in their particular situation. For someone who is being completely inactive, and say they've just been sitting on the couch for the last 5 or 10 years, they've been nothing at all, they get told they have bone density issues, the first point of call, walking, may be a big step up for them. This may be enough stimulus for them to help with their lower body bone density initially because they haven't been doing anything. And in their situation, that's quite a bit of a stimulus. Won't be a long-term thing. They probably want to apply more and more over time. But initially, this may be for you. Alternatively, if you're a hiker and you've actually been hiking every single weekend for the last 6 months or the last 6 years or whatever it may be, and you have bone density issues, yes, hiking and keeping up that and doing your regular hiking is probably still a good thing, but it may not be enough stress for you to actually take it a step further. So you may need to lean more in towards that other end of the spectrum. And on top of that, on the flip side, some people may be in the situation where that type of jump training, which I'll explore, that may be good. That may be a good, appropriate method of training for them and may be really beneficial. Alternatively, some people, if they haven't done a huge amount of training or if they're like a little further on the end of bone density loss or whatever it may be, it may be a little bit too much stress and may lean towards more of the accident side of things. So we need to consider this as a spectrum. This spectrum is subjective. And this is why personal advice is always useful. Why, if you are really concerned about this, if you're worried about this, work with a professional, work with someone one-to-one so they can actually give you personalized advice. But with that being said, let's explore each of these in a little bit more. So walking for bone density, first stop. Walking is often recommended as a first option. Walking can definitely help, and there's a lot of evidence to show that people who walk regularly have better bone density than those who are inactive. Very, very simple, but walking, weight-bearing activity will apply stress to the bones, gravity pushing down, happy days. But as a sole thing, it's probably not too great to focus on. Number one, and one thing a lot of people don't consider, is walking does not affect the upper body. Walking is good for bone density, but what gets missed in that sentence is walking is good for lower body bone density. There's no stress going through the upper body. There's no stress going through the wrists. There's no stress going through the shoulders. And that is very much something we need to be aware of. Because a lot of hikers, if we're tripping over, we will be trying to catch ourselves with our hands. We need to be aware of this. Number two is walking, as we said before. It's beneficial, but it's relatively low stress. If you are already a regular hiker and you're looking at bone density concerns, chances are you may be already doing lots of walking. So it may not be just doing more and more walking, may not be the answer for you. And also it's hard to progress. You can walk and walk and walk more and more and more, but it gets to a point where you're like, I don't really have much more time or whatever it may be. So walking is great, but it is definitely on the lower end of things. Next up, we got our pack walking and hiking for bone density. And this is something that does need to be explored because many times I hear from hikers saying, I have bone density issues. I just do lots of hiking with a pack to help with that, which is great. And it's definitely a natural progression for hikers where we can go out and load up a pack and get this because, hikers will do this. And it's definitely a step in the right direction because it applies more load, it applies more stress, it takes it a step further. But again, by itself, it probably isn't going to be quite enough. Again, it doesn't really affect the upper body. There's a little bit more stress on the upper body, but it's not really doing anything there. Number two, it's probably still considered more on the lower stress end of stress. Definitely more so than just normal walking, but it's still kind of considered a little bit on the lower end. And again, if you're a regular hiker and this is regular for you, we probably want more stimulus. And this also does tend to have an endpoint. There comes to a point where you're like, I can't really load up the pack any heavier, so we can do it for a while, it gets to a point, but comfortably, it does have an endpoint. So pack walking, great, but we want to typically take it a step further. That's where strength training comes in. And this is sort of the gold standard for most people in regards to bone density, because it's something that is very accessible for a lot of people. It's very, very targeted for a lot of people. We can apply much more stress for, in where we want, in a good way. And it's definitely something anyone with bone density concerns should be considering. Strength training basically involves applying resistance to the body through body weight, dumbbells, barbells, machines, packs, bands, really anything. You are applying stress to the body. This tends to be a really, really, really good option for bone density because, number one, it can impact the whole body. We can do lower body, we can do upper body, we can impact all the different areas of the body, which is exactly what we want to do. It will apply much more stress than pack walking or pack walking because realistically, even if you load up a pack outrageously heavy as you can handle, you can probably do hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of steps before you need a rest, realistically. Strength training typically will be loading up with a resistance where we may do 10 repetitions or 15 repetitions or maybe 20 repetitions at the most, and then we kind of need a rest. The force and stress we're applying with strength training is big step up in regards to this. And on top of that, it's relatively simple to progress. There's so many options out there for strength training, so many ways where you can just make it a little bit harder, a little bit harder, a little bit harder. And you can ultimately have almost unlimited time to progress this. People have been training for 10, 20, 30 years and still can make things harder for themselves. It's really, really good on that front. And it's very safe. A lot of people are hesitant to get into strength training because they're a little bit wary of it. But if you approach it in an intelligent way, it is very, very, very safe. And technically, it probably is a bit even safer than hiking in the sense of having less chance of having an accident because you're just pretty much more controlled. Now, beyond that, strength training, as much as it's great, not all strength training is the same. Again, different types of strength training can be seen on a spectrum, in the sense that lower resistance strength training is great, but then we apply medium resistance, it probably applies a little bit more stress to the bones, and higher resistance applies a little bit more stress to the bones as well. So there are different levels of strength training where we can stress the bones out in slightly different ways, and we can slide up that spectrum depending on how much we apply things. Many hikers, what we tend to find is they do get stuck on the lower end of things, which is great. It's definitely better than nothing. But if you aren't very much concerned about bone density issues, it's very worthwhile considering how can I actually over time make things a little bit more challenging with strength training to stress out the body, stress out the bones, and keep me moving forward. You will get some really, really, really incredible benefits from progressively challenging yourself here, both in the bone density context and broader hiking context. There's so many other benefits for slightly more challenging strength training. That doesn't mean you have to be training like a bodybuilder or a powerlifter and absolutely go to your limit, but applying a bit more resistance and a bit more challenge over time. Now, one thing that a lot of people are like, when I get to this point in the conversation, we're like, hey, strength training, you've been doing exercises where you've been doing 15 repetitions and that's okay. Maybe you've gone to like 10 repetitions and that'd been okay. But the thought of getting a little bit heavier makes you a little bit nervous. And you're like, oh, I'm not really sure about that. I'm not sure if I can control it. I'm a little bit worried. Whatever it may be. That's totally fine and totally valid. If you are concerned about getting things harder with your strength training, using machines can be a really, really good option. And this can make this much more accessible for you. Essentially machines, so going into the gym, going on one of those preset machines, they can take out all the stability requirements. So if you're worried about, hey, doing a squat and you're worried about like falling over, or you're worried about keeping your form or your posture, or you're worried about X, Y, and Z, which, a lot of thought needs to go into a regular exercise. If you go on a machine, say you did a leg press, you don't need to worry about this thing. You're never going to fall over. There's very, very little you have to think about except moving the weight up and down. On top of that, the machines can allow you to load them up safely. Sometimes, again, using the squat example, it can be a little bit awkward if we're trying to load up quite a bit of weight, but we got to pick up the dumbbell, or we got to load up a backpack with lots of weight and lift it up, or whatever it may be. And it can be a bit of a limiting factor. With a machine, you can literally just get a pin and change it into a heavier weight, or you can put a weight on and it can make it much, much easier. So definitely very, very useful. As a hiker, when often I talk about this, people are a little bit hesitant saying, is this really going to help my hiking? But I'll tell you, it's really, really beneficial. As long as you're challenging yourself, strengthening yourself, it's still going to be beneficial for the trail, even if you're on a machine. To give you like context of this and just give you a demonstration, this is an example of an exercise that I get a lot of my hikers doing at home. A floor press with a pack. You can do this with dumbbells as well. This is a great upper body exercise and it's really, really good. And it can be a really nice starting point when we're looking at applying resistance to the upper body. But as you can see, you may be able to load up a pack with a certain amount of weight, but realistically, if you try to get heavier and heavier and heavier, it's going to get a little bit awkward, because how are you actually going to get the pack into this position if it's a super heavy pack? Or how are you going to get it out of position, or whatever it may be? How are you going to grip it? If you're using dumbbells, even that can get a little bit wobbly. And there is a bit of a limitation. So doing this, it's great, but it'll only take you up to a point. So if you're looking at this machine type of thing, like this is not my video, it comes from Tri-Cities Gold's Gym. But basically in this machine, it's basically applying resistance to the same muscles, but there's none of that setup. There's none of that worry. You literally sit on a machine, you change the weight on a pin-loaded thing, and you literally just push up and down. You can kind of see in context how the machine can just take out that stability, make things a little bit easier, make things a little bit more doable, and allow you to challenge yourself. So if you're considering strength training for bone density, and you're a bit hesitant about these things, that may be worthwhile. Obviously, that involves you having to go to a gym, you get a gym membership. A lot of people don't enjoy that. Fair enough. But for full broader context, hopefully that makes sense. And then next up, so we talked about strength training. That tends to be the gold standard in regards to bone density stuff, and something every single hiker should be considering in one shape, form, or another. The next thing on the spectrum is jump training or plyometrics, which can be a really, 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 really good method of training for bone density. There's a lot of research, a lot of evidence to show this can be very, very beneficial, but it does take a little bit more thought and a little bit more attention to apply safely. So we'll talk about this. Now, jump training is literally what it sounds like, literally jumping. Jumping on one leg, jumping on two legs, jumping on a box, jumping off a box, whatever it may be. Plyometrics is kind of repeated jumping. So if you're jumping, and repeatedly doing things, or if you're on the upper body and doing repeated explosive movements of some type, that tends to be plyometrics. You can get a bit more technical in definition, but that's close enough. Now, there is a lot of good evidence to show that this type of training can be very effective for bone density, because it's applying a lot of stress to the body. It's applying a lot of stress to the bones, and it can be very effective. There's a lot of evidence, a lot of studies to show this. However, as we said before, as we're applying more and more stress, this is getting into the territory of risk when things can go wrong. In the sense, it can sometimes be easy to apply too much stress and be like, oh, that's a little bit much. It takes a little bit more coordination in the sense that falling over, tripping, whatever it may be. And it does have a little bit more risk associated with it, even though it's really good. Many people are hesitant about this, which is absolutely fair enough. I fully understand. And people who do have greater bone density issues, maybe they're further along the way of, the bone density issues, this may not be appropriate. Your specialist may say, you know what, technically this is really, really good, but for you, maybe this isn't so good. It may be too much or whatever it may be. As we said, this type of stuff is subjective. Like strength training, this type of stuff, if you are considering it and wondering about it and thinking, hey, could I potentially apply this? It's not all or nothing. Jump training can be good, but there's many, many different levels of jump training which you can potentially apply. And this is a conversation I was having with a hiker the other day who was like, hey, I've been told jump training's really, really good, but I'm a little bit worried about it. Like, should I be doing it? Should I not be doing it? Whatever it may be. I'm going to show you a few examples of this to kind of illustrate what I mean here. But just to be clear, if you're applying this, probably you want to be working with a professional. You want to be working with someone at least, the very least, knows your personal situation. They can say, yeah, this is maybe a good idea. Maybe this isn't a good idea. They can direct you into how to actually apply this. So I'm going to give you examples, but this isn't me saying, hey, go out and do this. This is just demonstrating the point. So if we're looking at jump training on the lower end of the spectrum, on this spectrum, and we're like, there are various different types of jump training which you can affect and progress through. At the beginning levels of jump training, might be something like this, which is known as like a tall to short. So in this particular situation, it's not so much doing a jump, but you can kind of see that there's like an explosive movement. We're coming up to the top, we're very, very quickly coming down, and we're basically just teaching the body to absorb force. This is technically jump training. This is technically what we're talking about here. And as you can see, if we're doing this quickly, if we're doing this explosively, this can apply quite a amount of force. So this could be an entry point for a lot of people with this type of stuff. Now, take this a step further, we may sort of start doing landing training, where what we're doing is we're not so much jumping, but we're going up on a step or a box, and it's a small step or a small box to start. You may even start smaller than this, and you're literally just stepping off and landing. Again, this is a lot of force. This is a lot of stress through the bones. It's much more than the thing before, but this can be a legitimate stepping stone before we actually get to the point where you're jumping. And you can adjust this. You can start on a really, really, really low step and slowly build up. But you can see that stress. The next up on this progression is actually getting into some type of jumping. And again, these are not my videos, so full credit to these guys for this. But this is where we might be doing squat jumps, where we're literally jumping up and jumping down. This progressing. And you can see this is more force going through the bones. Now, the next one is a really, really like high level of stress option. I wouldn't really use this for my hikers if I was working with them directly, but I have seen this in certain recommendations around training for bone density. So I will use this as an example. Is a depth jump is what you're doing is standing on a box, jumping off, and then jumping immediately upwards. You can see there's a lot of stress where you come down and straight back up. And you can see in this jump training, it's not all exactly the same, but there's methods. Some of this may be appropriate to you, some of this may not be, but again, it's all very much subjective. I'll sort of say, like when it comes down to jump training is, that's all lower body stuff. There are definitely options for upper body as well, which I haven't applied because this video is long enough. But you may be doing like banded plyometric push-ups. So plyometric push-ups is like a push-up where you're like coming off the ground and you're literally going into the air. That's a little bit tricky for most people. A banded one is where basically you put an elastic band around your belly, attach it to something high, and that actually pulls you up and down. So you're still getting that force and this and that, but it's an option. Again, that is pretty advanced. That can be pretty tricky. It needs to be applied intelligently, but as an example of upper body, that's something there. As I sort of said, if you are interested in exploring jump training, this is on the further side of risk. So it can be really good, but you need to apply it intelligently. So probably chat with a professional about how to introduce it if you haven't done this before, so you can find the appropriate level for you. Someone can teach you how to do it, yada, yada, yada. Now, that's the main thing we've been talking about of like how training directly affects bone density. And hopefully that kind of just gives a bit more context and just lays things out in a way where you're like, that actually makes sense, and that breaks things up a little bit more. If you are training for bone density, there are other things you do want to consider. Balance is very, very, very important because, as we said before, falls is one of the major things when it comes down to bone density. We don't want to fall. We don't want to trip. If you're a hiker, the idea of balance can sometimes be a little bit different to just everyday balance versus hiking balance. That is very, very important. If you want to learn a little bit more about that and exercise you can apply for balance for hiking, I'll put a video in the show notes below. You can check that out. It actually goes into a lot of detail on this. On top of that, muscle strength for its own sake, even outside of bone density, very, very important. Another reason why strength training is so useful. And also fatigue reduction for hikers is really, really important. In the sense we said before, fatigue increases the risk of falls. Falls is not what we want if we have bone density. So we want to be doing everything we can to reduce fatigue. That means working on aerobic fitness, making sure we get our nutrition right, making sure we get our hydration right, all that good practice on the trail. So if you have bone density concerns, fatigue reduction should very much be up there as well. So you're never really getting exhausted on the trail. All of these, very, very important in this context as well. So just to wrap things up and summarize, when it comes down to bone density for hiking, smart training can be really, 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 really beneficial. I would personally recommend if you're a hiker who is considering bone density, we want to be doing plenty of walking and hiking anyway. As a hiker, you'll probably be doing this already. Unloaded, loaded. Whether you're doing loaded pack walking around the local neighborhood or doing it on the trail, all of this can be really beneficial. Every single hiker, I personally believe, should be doing strength training, and even more so when it comes down to bone density. Ideally, what you want to be looking at is a mix of sort of lower weight, high rep endurance stuff. So when you're doing exercises for 15, 12, maybe 10 repetitions, so you're kind of, working through that, and then slowly progress to some slightly higher weight, lower rep stuff, slightly more challenging. Whether you can do that with the weights or resistances you have access to, whether you want to go to a gym and get access to a machine, whatever it may be. And just make sure over time you're applying progressive overload. And then jump training can be a potential option. As I said before, if you're working with a professional, he can give you some clear and individual advice on that. That's the next step in the equation, which can take things a bit further. In the hiking context, probably worthwhile considering if you've got someone in your corner to help you with that, because it can have some good benefits for hiking as well. The good news is when it comes down to all of this training, aside from the jump training, is pretty standard in a well-rounded hiking program. All of this, walking, hiking, pack walking, strength training, heavier strength training, lighter strength training, all of that will have a tremendous range of different benefits for hikers anyway. So if you're thinking about bone density, it's not all one or the other. It's not like you have to pick and choose, but you just want to be smart just to apply a comprehensive program, and it will go a long, long way. And as I said before, and I've said 20 times on this, if you're unsure how to apply any of this, work with a professional, get someone in your corner, help you out. But all in all, I really do hope this has been useful for a few people. I hope it has given a little bit clarity in regards to the broader context of some of this type of stuff. And so to give an awareness around how different elements of training can affect the topic of bone density. So if there's anything in there which doesn't make sense or maybe wasn't super clear or whatever it may be, please reach out and let me know. But I really do hope this helps a lot of people, gives some extra ideas and extra context, and helps a lot of people just on that journey to help their bone density and also help with their hiking as well. So with that being said, I'm going to wrap up here. Thank you for listening. Hope you've enjoyed it, and we'll talk to you soon.